Have you ever been in a place where everything you once trusted began to crumble? When the future you imagined disappeared in an instant, and the questions inside your heart became louder than your prayers? We all reach that moment when we whisper, "God, where are you?" It's the moment after the phone call that changes everything. The moment after the door closes, and you're left alone with silence that feels heavier than words. The moment when your faith feels like it's hanging by a thread. You see, peace isn't something we think about until it's gone. We chase after success, approval, stability, love, believing those things will keep us safe. But when they fade, when life strips us bare, we finally realize that the peace we built was fragile. Because it depended on everything around us being okay. But real peace, the kind Jesus spoke of, is different. It's not built on circumstances. It's not destroyed by storms. It's a peace that lives within you, even when the world outside is falling apart. The disciples learned this on the Sea of Galilee. A storm came so suddenly that the sky went black and the waves crashed like thunder. They fought against the wind, terrified, shouting for help. And Jesus, their teacher, their hope, was asleep. Can you imagine that feeling? You're fighting for your life, and the one who has power to save you is silent. But Jesus stood, looked into the chaos, and said 3 words, "Peace, be still." And the storm obeyed. The wind stopped. The sea became calm. Maybe today, that's what he's saying to your heart. Not to your circumstances, but to your soul. Peace, be still. You see, the peace of Christ is not the promise that the storm will end. It's the presence of someone who will never leave you in it. He doesn't remove every pain. He redeems it. He doesn't always calm the sea around you. Sometimes he calms the storm within you. When everything falls apart, your heart becomes the battlefield between fear and faith. Fear tells you, you're alone. It's over. Faith whispers, you're held. It's not the end. And peace comes when you choose to listen to faith, when you let God's voice be louder than your fear. Maybe right now, your life feels like it's been reduced to pieces. Something you loved slipped away. Something you built fell apart. You prayed, but haven't stayed silent. And you wonder if God even sees you anymore. But listen carefully, God's silence is not his absence. Sometimes his silence is the lesson. He's teaching you that even when you can't feel him, you can still trust him. That even when the path disappears, his hand hasn't let go. We spend so much of our lives trying to control what was never ours to command. We think peace comes from order, from having everything in its right place. But God's peace begins where our control ends. It begins in surrender. Letting go is hard. We think that if we release our grip, everything will fall apart. But what if it's already falling apart because we're holding too tightly? What if God is saying, "Child, trust me with what you can't fix"? The truth is, peace doesn't mean the absence of pain. It means that your pain no longer controls you. Peace doesn't mean forgetting what you lost. It means remembering that loss doesn't define your future. Look at Job. He lost everything: his wealth, his children, his health. And still, through tears, he said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." That is peace, not numbness, not denial, but a faith that stands even when the foundation cracks. And maybe that's the peace God wants for you, not comfort, but courage. Not a soft life, but a strong soul. Isaiah 26:3 says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." Perfect peace isn't found in perfect circumstances. It's found in perfect trust. When your eyes are fixed on him instead of the waves, you can walk on water. When your heart is anchored in his word, you can stand even when everything else shakes. Sometimes, peace begins with honesty. You don't have to pretend you're okay. You don't have to hide your tears or suppress your fears. God is not intimidated by your pain. He doesn't turn away when you're broken. In fact, the Bible says he is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So cry if you need to. Scream if you must. But don't quit. Don't give up on the one who hasn't given up on you. Peace isn't a switch you flip. It's a relationship you nurture. You build it day by day, prayer by prayer, breath by breath. When you wake up in the morning, before you reach for your phone, whisper, "God, I'm yours." When anxiety grips you, say, "Jesus, be my peace." When fear rises like a flood, remember, he once spoke to the waves and they listened. Sometimes God calms the storm. Other times, he lets the storm show you what's still broken inside you. Either way, he's working for your good. When everything around you seems to collapse, Remind yourself, this is not where the story ends. The same God who brought you this far will not abandon you now. Every tear, every trial, every unanswered prayer is part of a bigger story, one you can't see yet, but one that ends in victory. Maybe peace won't come in a moment. Maybe it will come gradually, like dawn breaking after a long night. First a glimmer, then a glow, then a sunrise that reminds you light always wins. You are stronger than you think, not because of your strength, but because His Spirit lives in you. You are not forsaken. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. So right now, wherever you are, take a deep breath. Let the noise fade. Let the worries go. Whisper this truth: God, even if everything falls apart, I know you hold me together. And you'll feel it, the quiet presence, the gentle assurance that even in the ruins, peace can rise again. Because peace isn't something you find. Peace is someone who finds you. He found the disciples in the storm. He found the woman weeping at His feet. He found Peter in his shame. And He will find you, too. So don't rush the healing. Don't curse the silence. Don't fear the storm. It might just be the place where peace begins. And when it does, when peace finally takes root in your heart, you'll realize something incredible. Your world may still be broken, but you're no longer breaking with it. You'll walk through the chaos with calm eyes and a steady heart. You'll understand that peace isn't the end of your struggle, it's the strength to keep going through it. So lift your eyes. Breathe again. Your heart still beats. Your story still matters. And even now, even here, in the middle of everything falling apart, God is whispering, peace, be still. There's a moment in every believer's life that feels like a quiet breaking point. Not the kind where everything explodes, but the kind where everything stops. You pray, and nothing happens. You cry out, and all you hear is your own voice echoing back. The heavens, once alive with warmth and presence, suddenly feel like stone. You wonder, did I do something wrong? Has God turned away from me? But what if His silence doesn't mean absence? What if silence is not punishment, but preparation? The truth is, some of the deepest transformations happen not in the noise of miracles, but in the quiet of waiting. It's there in the stillness, in the unanswered prayers, that faith stops being something we talk about and starts becoming something we live. Think of Abraham, staring at the stars God promised would become his descendants, yet year after year nothing. Think of Joseph, sitting in a prison cell for crimes he didn't commit, wondering if the dreams God gave him were just illusions. Think of David, anointed to be king, yet hiding in caves, hunted and alone. Think of Jesus Himself, kneeling in Gethsemane, His sweat like drops of blood, whispering, Father, if it be possible, take this cup from me. Even the Son of God faced the silence of heaven. But silence doesn't mean abandonment. It means God is working on a level we can't yet see. Because in silence, faith is purified. In silence, pride is stripped away. In silence, trust becomes real. When everything goes quiet, we start to realize how much noise we were depending on, the constant reassurance, the emotional highs, the visible blessings. But faith was never meant to be based on feelings. Faith is built on a person, and that person never changes, even when he seems quiet. Maybe you're in that place right now. You've prayed the same prayer for months or years and there's still no answer. You've asked for healing, for direction, for breakthrough, and every day feels like a rerun of waiting. Your faith feels tired, your hope stretched thin, but let me tell you something beautiful. God's silence is never empty. It's full of purpose. Sometimes He's quiet because He's testing the depth of your trust. Sometimes because He's protecting you from what you can't yet handle. And sometimes because He's preparing something far greater than you've asked for. The Israelites cried for deliverance for 400 years. For centuries of silence. No prophet, no miracles, no voice from heaven. And then one day a baby's cry in a manger broke the silence. God had been listening all along. He wasn't late. He was right on time. If God feels silent right now, it's not because He's gone. It's because He's still writing your story. And some chapters are written in whispers. You see, the waiting room is where warriors are made. It's where spiritual muscles form, where dependence deepens, and where the roots of faith dig down into the soil of endurance. It's easy to trust when everything's moving. But when nothing moves, that's when real trust begins. Maybe God's silence is His invitation to lean closer, not pull away. To stop demanding answers and start seeking presence. Because sometimes, the answer isn't information, it's intimacy. He doesn't always explain himself, but he always reveals himself to those who keep listening. When Elijah hid in the cave, he expected God to speak through power, through wind, through earthquake, through fire. But God's voice came in a whisper, a gentle breath that said, "I am still here." And maybe that's what you need to hear today. He's still here. He hasn't left you. He hasn't forgotten you. He's not ignoring your prayers, he's shaping you through them. When God feels silent, remember, the teacher is always quiet during the test. That doesn't mean the teacher is gone. It means you've learned enough to apply what he already taught you. So don't mistake silence for distance. Don't confuse waiting with wasting. The same God who was faithful yesterday is still faithful today. And when the time is right, the silence will break, not with a whisper of despair, but with the sound of fulfillment. Maybe you're praying for a door to open, but God's building a whole new house. Maybe you're asking for restoration, but he's planning resurrection. Maybe you're asking for peace, and he's preparing purpose. You don't need to understand the silence, you just need to stay in it. Stay steady. Keep showing up. Keep trusting. Keep believing that even when you can't hear his voice, he's still speaking life over you. When you can't trace his hand, trust his heart, because his heart for you has never changed. Even in silence, he's singing over you. Even in waiting, he's working. Even in darkness, he's designing something radiant. One day, when the silence lifts, you'll look back and realize he was there the whole time. You'll see that the delay wasn't a denial. It was a divine strategy. He was protecting your peace, perfecting your faith, and positioning you for his promise. Until then, walk by faith, not by sight. Whisper his name in the dark. Let your tears become your worship. Because peace doesn't come from knowing why, it comes from knowing who died, and that who is faithful. That who is Jesus, the one who spoke galaxies into being, yet still hears your quiet cry at midnight. The one who seemed silent for 3 days in the tomb, but rose again to prove that even when heaven is quiet, hope is never dead. So if you're living through a silent season, hold on. Don't rush it. Don't fear it. Let it shape you. Because one day, when the silence breaks, you'll realize it was never empty. It was holy. And through that silence, God was teaching you how to hear his voice. Even when the world goes quiet, you will stand stronger. You will walk wiser. And the peace you'll carry will not be fragile, it will be unshakable. Because you'll know that even in the silence, God was speaking all along. Have you ever felt like your faith was too small? Like no matter how hard you tried to believe, the doubt just wouldn't go away? You pray, but your words feel hollow. You worship, but your heart feels distant. You hear people talk about great faith, and you wonder, what's wrong with mine? We've all been there. There are seasons when faith doesn't feel like a roaring fire, it feels like a flickering candle barely holding on against the wind. But here's the good news, even the smallest flame can push back the darkness. Jesus once said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move, and it will move. He didn't say, if you have perfect faith or unshakable faith. He said, small, tiny, almost invisible. Because the power was never in the size of your faith, it was in the one your faith is placed in. Sometimes we think faith is about how strong we feel. But faith isn't a feeling, it's a decision. It's a quiet choice to trust even when you don't understand. It's whispering, God, I still believe you're good, when everything around you says otherwise. There's a story in the Gospel of Mark that captures this perfectly. A desperate father brings his son to Jesus. The boy has been tormented for years, possessed by an evil spirit that throws him into convulsions and fire. You can hear the heartbreak in the father's voice as he cries out, if you can do anything, please help us. And Jesus replies, if I can. Everything is possible for the one who believes. The father's response is raw and real. I do believe. Help my unbelief. What a confession. He's saying, I believe but my faith is fragile. Please fill the gaps where my strength runs out. And you know what? Jesus didn't rebuke him. He didn't say, come back when your faith is stronger. He healed the boy right there, because God isn't waiting for you to have perfect faith. He's waiting for you to bring the little faith you have and place it in his hands. He can work with that. Maybe your faith feels like that father's today. You believe, but you're tired. You believe, but the waiting has worn you down. You believe, but part of you is scared to hope again. And still, God whispers, that's enough. Do you remember Peter walking on the water? He took just a few steps before fear pulled him under. He doubted. He panicked, but Jesus didn't let him drown. He reached out, caught him, and said, "Why did you doubt?" But notice this, Peter's small faith still got him out of the boat. The others stayed behind, clinging to safety. Peter at least tried. Small faith moves you. Small faith gets you up in the morning. Small faith keeps you praying, even when you don't feel heard. Small faith keeps you showing up, even when your heart is weary. And God honors that. Faith doesn't grow in comfort, it grows in tension. A seed doesn't bloom in sunlight alone. It breaks through the darkness of the soil. That's what faith is like. It grows underground and seen, while God works in silence. When your faith feels weak, remember, you are not alone. Every giant of faith in the Bible had moments of doubt. Moses questioned God's choice. Elijah begged God to take his life. David cried out, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" And even Jesus, in his humanity, cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Yet all of them found strength in surrender. They kept coming back to the same truth: God is faithful, even when I'm not. Sometimes, the greatest act of faith isn't shouting victory from the mountaintop, it's whispering hope in the valley. Faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it trembles. But trembling faith still reaches heaven. If your faith feels small, don't despise it. Protect it, feed it. Guard it like a fragile seed in winter. Because one day, it will bloom again. You see, growth isn't always visible. When a seed is buried in the ground, it looks dead. But under the surface, life is happening, roots are forming, strength is building. That's you right now. You might not see the fruit yet, but your roots are growing deeper than ever. So keep believing, even if your belief feels small. Keep praying, even if your voice shakes. Keep trusting, even when it doesn't make sense. God doesn't need your perfection. He needs your persistence. He honors the one who stays, even with trembling hands. Because faith that endures the fire becomes unbreakable. There's a passage in 2 Corinthians 12 where Paul says, "I will boast in my weaknesses, because when I am weak, then I am strong." That's the paradox of faith. It's not about being invincible, it's about being dependent. The moment you admit, "I can't," heaven whispers back, "I can." You don't have to climb the mountain in one leap. Sometimes, faith looks like taking one small step and trusting that God will meet you there. Sometimes, faith looks like standing still when everything in you wants to run. Sometimes, faith looks like falling on your knees and saying, "Help my unbelief." And the beautiful thing is He will. Your small faith may not move mountains today, but it can move the heart of God. And that's enough. Remember this, a mustard seed doesn't stay small forever. In the right soil, under the right care, it grows into something strong enough for others to find shelter in. One day, your story of doubt and persistence will become someone else's reason to believe. Your pain will become a testimony. Your waiting will become a message of hope. So don't be ashamed of your small faith. Treasure it. Feed it with truth. Water it with prayer. Expose it to the light of His Word. And watch slowly, quietly it will grow. And one day, you'll look back and realize that your small, trembling faith wasn't small at all. It was mighty because you held onto the one who never let go of you. Waiting for healing is one of the hardest things a person can do, because waiting hurts. It's not just the physical pain, but the ache in the soul, the exhaustion of praying, believing, and hoping, and still waking up to the same reality. You tell yourself to stay strong. You quote the verses. You whisper, "God's timing is perfect," but deep down, you wonder if He's still listening. You watch others receive their miracles, and you're happy for them truly. But in the quiet of your own heart, you ask, "Lord, when is it my turn?" If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. Every person of faith has faced that silence, that in-between season where healing hasn't yet come, and you don't know if it ever will. The Bible is full of waiting. Abraham waited decades for his promise. Joseph waited years in a prison cell. Hannah wept for years before Samuel was born. Even Jesus waited 30 years before beginning his ministry. God does some of his greatest work in the waiting, but that doesn't make it easy. Waiting tests everything: your patience, your hope, your identity. It strips away illusions of control and forces you to confront what you truly believe about God. Because faith in the waiting isn't about getting what you want, it's about trusting who He is. Sometimes healing comes instantly. Sometimes it takes years. And sometimes the healing God gives isn't the one we expect, it's deeper. It's the healing of the heart before the healing of the body. It's the restoration of peace before the removal of pain. There's a story in the Gospels that captures this perfectly. A woman, sick for 12 long years, had spent everything she had on doctors. She was considered unclean and wanted, forgotten. And yet, when she heard Jesus was passing by, something in her rose up, a quiet, stubborn hope. If I can just touch the hem of his robe, she thought, I'll be healed. She didn't shout. She didn't demand attention. She simply reached. And in that moment, her faith, small, trembling, desperate, collided with divine power. Jesus turned, not to scold her, but to speak the words she'd been longing to hear. Daughter, your faith has made you whole. That's the beauty of God's healing. It meets you where you are. You don't need to shout for it. You just need to reach for it. But what about when the healing doesn't come? What about the prayers that end in tears and the nights that feel endless? Is God still good then? Yes, He is. Because His goodness isn't proven by what He gives, it's revealed by who He is. There's another story about the Apostle Paul. He described something he called a thorn in the flesh, a burden so painful he pleaded with God 3 times to take it away. But God didn't. Instead, he said, My grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul didn't get the healing he asked for, but he got something even greater. He got revelation. He discovered that sometimes the presence of pain is what keeps us close to the presence of God, and that grace can carry us where strength cannot. Maybe your thorn isn't physical. Maybe it's a wound in your heart that never fully healed. Maybe it's anxiety that won't let go. Maybe it's a loss that left a hole no words can fill. And every time you pray, it feels like your words fall flat. But what if the delay isn't denial? What if God is doing something inside you, something eternal through the very pain you wish He'd remove? Healing isn't just about the absence of pain. It's about the presence of peace. Sometimes God calms the storm, and sometimes He calms His child in the middle of it. And maybe that's what He's doing for you right now. Maybe He's teaching you how to rest before the miracle arrives. Maybe He's reminding you that your value isn't found in your health, your success, or your situation, but in your connection to Him. Healing can take many forms. For some, it's a miraculous recovery. For others, it's finding peace in the middle of suffering. And for some, it's the quiet realization that even if the body fades, the soul can still shine brighter than ever. When you're waiting for healing, remember this: you're not forgotten. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. God is not ignoring your cries, He's collecting them. Every tear, every sigh, every whispered prayer is known to Him. He's weaving your pain into a story that will bring life to others. Your scars will speak to someone else's survival. Your endurance will inspire someone else's faith. Don't give up. Don't rush what God is refining. Even when your heart feels heavy, your faith still matters. Even when your body feels weak, your spirit can still be strong. Healing may not be instant, but it will be complete, in His time, in His way. There will come a day when pain will be no more, when tears will be wiped away, and the broken will be made whole. Until that day, keep walking by faith. Keep believing that your story isn't over yet, because the same Jesus who healed the sick, opened blind eyes, and raised the dead, He hasn't changed. His compassion is still the same. His power is still alive. And His love for you is still deeper than the wound you carry. You might not see it yet, but healing is already in motion. Every day, God is doing something in you, strengthening your spirit, renewing your mind, preparing your heart. One day, you'll look back and realize you weren't waiting for healing. You were being healed all along. So hold on to hope. Even if it's just a thread, grip it tight. Because sometimes, faith looks like reaching for the hem of His garment one more time. And when you do, you'll find that the hand of heaven has been reaching for you all along. He is near. He is working. He is healing, even now. There's a kind of pain that no one can see. A quiet ache that hides behind a smile. A weight that sits on your chest long after the tears have dried. It's the pain of guilt. Not because someone hurt you, but because you hurt someone else. Because of what you said, what you did, or what you failed to do when it mattered most. You know God forgives. You've heard it 100 times in church, sung it in songs, read it in scripture. But still, when you're alone, that one memory plays again and again in your mind. You whisper, "I know God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself." If that's you, listen closely. This message is for you. You see, shame is one of the enemy's favorite tools. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't always accuse. Sometimes it just reminds. It replays the moment you fell, the mistake you made, the promise you broke. It tells you, you're not who you used to be. And the worst part is you start to believe it. But here's the truth. God's forgiveness isn't a theory, it's a transaction. When Jesus said, "It is finished," He meant paid in full. That includes your sin, your failure, your guilt, and your self-condemnation. He didn't just die to forgive you. He died to free you. When you hold on to guilt after God has released you, you're carrying a weight He already lifted. You're chaining yourself to something He already broke. You're standing outside a prison cell whose door He already opened. Think about Peter. He swore he'd never abandon Jesus, and then he did, 3 times. When the rooster crowed, he realized what he'd done and wept bitterly. For days, that moment must have haunted him. But when the risen Jesus met Peter on the shore, He didn't say, "Why did you fail me?" He said, "Do you love me?" 3 times. Not to shame him, but to restore him. Because grace doesn't erase your past, it redeems it. Peter's failure became the foundation for his ministry. His pain became his power. The man who once denied Jesus became the man who boldly declared His name before thousands. That's what happens when grace rewrites your story. Maybe your rooster crow moment still echoes in your soul. Maybe it's the relationship you destroyed, the opportunity you lost, the words you can't take back. And every time you think you've moved on, guilt drags you back. But God's mercy doesn't just cover your sin, it covers the shame that came with it. When He forgave you, He didn't leave a record on file. He threw it into the sea of forgetfulness. The only one still holding onto it is you. So let me say this as clearly as I can. You don't have to keep punishing yourself for something Jesus already paid for. Yes, you messed up. Yes, you hurt people. Yes, you wish you could undo it. But God doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be honest. He needs you to bring the broken pieces, not hide them. Forgiveness isn't pretending it never happened. It's letting God turn it into something beautiful. The same way He took a wooden cross, a symbol of death, and turned it into the greatest sign of life the world has ever known. Maybe you've prayed 1,000 times, "Lord, forgive me," and He's answered every single time. I already have. The problem isn't that God hasn't forgiven you, it's that you haven't accepted His forgiveness as final. You're still standing in the courtroom, begging for mercy, while He's already signed your pardon and left the room. So how do you forgive yourself? It starts by believing that God's word is greater than your feelings. You might feel unworthy, but He says you're chosen. You might feel dirty, but He calls you clean. You might feel broken, but He calls you beloved. You see, your identity isn't tied to your failure, it's anchored in His forgiveness. You are not what you did. You are who He says you are. And here's the beautiful part: God doesn't waste pain. Every scar, every failure, every tear can become a bridge for someone else's healing. Your story of restoration can become someone else's reason to hope. There's freedom waiting for you, but you have to let go of the guilt to take hold of it. You have to stop rehearsing your mistakes and start remembering His mercy. You have to trade your "I should have been better" for "Thank you, Lord, for not giving up on me." So when shame comes knocking, and it will answer it with grace. When guilt starts whispering, "You're not enough," remind it, maybe not, but Jesus is. And when your past tries to define your future, remind it that the blood of Jesus already wrote a new ending. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means trusting that God can bring purpose even from the ashes. And He can. He's done it before, and He'll do it again. Remember Paul. Before he was an apostle, he was a persecutor. He stood by as innocent people were killed in the name of religion. If anyone had a reason to drown in guilt, it was him. But he didn't. He said, "This one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead." He didn't deny his past. He just refused to let it control his future. And because of that, God used him to write nearly half the New Testament. Maybe that's what God wants for you to. Not to erase your past, but to transform it. To take the same hands that caused pain and turn them into hands that heal. To take the same mouth that spoke anger and turn it into a voice of compassion. To take the same heart that broke and fill it with grace for others who are breaking now. That's redemption. That's what grace does. It doesn't just forgive. It rebuilds. So today, release the guilt. You've carried it long enough. Lay it down at the foot of the cross. You don't have to earn peace, you just have to receive it. God is not disappointed in you. He's delighted when you return to Him. He's not replaying your failure. He's writing your comeback. And if you listen closely, you'll hear Him say the same words He said to Peter. "Do you love me? Then feed my sheep." In other words, you still have purpose. You're still part of my plan. It's not over. You are forgiven. You are free. And your story isn't ruined, it's redeemed. So breathe, let go, and start walking in the freedom that's already yours. Because the hardest person to forgive is often yourself. But the moment you do, you'll find the peace you've been praying for all along. Asterisk. Loss has a way of changing everything. It steals the air from your lungs, the light from your mornings, the rhythm from your days. You wake up and, for a split second, everything feels normal until memory rushes in like a cold wave, and you remember who's missing. Grief is love with nowhere to go. It's the echo of a laugh that no longer fills the room, the empty chair at the table, the phone that will never ring again. And in that silence, your heart asks questions it can't answer. Where are they now? Are they okay? Why did it have to happen this way? Even if you believe in heaven, there's still the ache of distance, the space between someday and right now. Faith doesn't cancel that pain. It simply gives it meaning. When someone you love is gone, the world keeps moving, but your soul feels stuck between two realities. The one that was, and the one you never asked for. You smile for others, but deep down, there's a storm that never fully quiets. And yet, in that storm, God whispers. Not always in explanations, but in presence. Not in loud answers, but in gentle reminders. I am still here. You are not alone. The shortest verse in the Bible says, Jesus wept. 2 words, but they tell us everything we need to know about God's heart. When Mary and Martha lost their brother Lazarus, Jesus didn't arrive with cold theology. He arrived with tears. He didn't rush their grief, He entered it. He felt what they felt. And even though He knew He would raise Lazarus, He still wept with them. Because love doesn't skip the pain, it shares it. If you've lost someone, you might have heard all the comforting words, "They're in a better place. You'll see them again. They're watching over you." And while all those things may be true, They don't stop the nights when you miss their voice. They don't fill the empty space beside you. But God doesn't ask you to skip those feelings. He invites you to bring them to Him raw, broken, and filtered. Because grief isn't a lack of faith. It's proof that you love deeply. And love, even when wounded, is still sacred. Maybe your loss wasn't sudden. Maybe you watched someone fade slowly, their strength slipping away while you prayed for a miracle that didn't come. Or maybe it happened in an instant, a call, a sound, a moment that divided your life into before and after. Either way, you're left with a question that echoes, why? And sometimes, heaven is silent. Not because God doesn't care, but because some answers live in eternity. We see the broken pieces. He sees the finished mosaic. One day, it will make sense. But today, He simply sits beside you in the ashes and whispers, I know. Even Jesus faced loss. He mourned His friend Lazarus. He wept over Jerusalem. And on the cross, He felt the full weight of abandonment, crying, my God, why have you forsaken me? He knows what grief feels like, not from afar, but from within. When you cry, you're not praying to a distant deity. You're talking to someone who has cried too. Grief has no schedule. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days you'll crumble. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. It's like the tide, sometimes calm, sometimes fierce, but always moving. And here's something beautiful. The presence of pain doesn't mean the absence of God. In fact, it's often in the deepest sorrow that His comfort feels the most real. He comes quietly through a verse you've read 1,000 times, through a song that suddenly hits different, through a memory that brings both tears and peace. He's in the friend who checks in the sunrise you didn't think you'd care to see, in the way your heart keeps beating even when you thought it couldn't. That's grace. That's Him. The Bible says God is close to the brokenhearted, not just aware of them close. Right there, in the space between your tears. And one day, that closeness will give way to reunion. Because this isn't the end of the story. Death may separate for a while, but it cannot sever what God has joined in love. Heaven isn't a myth, it's home. It's where every tear is wiped away, where laughter never fades, where you'll see their face again, not in memory, but in reality. Until that day, you carry two things, the ache of loss and the promise of hope. And that hope is not wishful thinking, it's rooted in resurrection. Because Jesus didn't just conquer death for Himself, He conquered it for all who believe. That's why Paul could say, we do not grieve like those who have no hope. We still grieve, but differently. We cry, but not as people defeated. We remember, but not as people without redemption. One day, you'll tell your story, and someone else who's drowning in their own loss will find air again because of your words. Your pain will become a ministry. Your tears will become healing oil for someone else's wounds. That doesn't happen overnight, but it begins with one brave act, letting yourself grieve in God's presence instead of away from it. He's not asking you to be strong today. He's asking you to be honest, to whisper, it hurts, and to let Him hold you there. Because grief may change you, but it doesn't have to destroy you. Love is stronger than death, and God's love is what keeps love alive. So if today feels heavy, if the memories still break you open, remember this, your story isn't over. Your loved one's story isn't over. You're both held in the same pair of hands, the ones with scars that say, even death cannot separate you from my love. One day, all the fragments will come together. And in that moment, when you see Him face to face, you'll understand what you couldn't before. And every wound will become light. Until then, breathe. Remember, hope. Because the same God who walked with you through loss is the same one who will walk you into reunion. You will see them again. And the love you shared will never die. There comes a moment in every believer's life when heaven seems quiet. You pray, and nothing happens. You cry out, and the walls echo your own voice back at you. You open your Bible hoping for a word that feels alive, but it reads like ink on a page. You start asking yourself questions you never thought you'd ask. Is God listening? Did I do something wrong? Has he left me? You remember the times when faith felt easy, when worship stirred your soul, when answers came quickly, when miracles felt close enough to touch. But now, there's only stillness, and in that stillness, the loneliness grows. If that's where you are right now, take heart. You're not abandoned, you're in holy company. Because some of the greatest people of faith walked through the silence of God. Abraham heard a promise and waited decades for its fulfillment. David cried out, "My God, why are you so far from me?" Job sat in the ashes and begged for answers that never came. And even Jesus, hanging on the cross, whispered the same words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If the Son of God himself could experience the silence of heaven, then maybe silence isn't absence, maybe it's preparation. You see, silence has a purpose. It reveals what noise can hide. It strips away everything superficial until all that's left is the truth of your heart and the depth of your trust. When God is silent, it's not because he's forgotten you. It's because he's forming something in you that only silence can shape. Faith isn't proven in answered prayers, it's proven in waiting ones. Sometimes, God's silence is his greatest act of intimacy. He's teaching you to hear his voice not just in thunder, but in whispers. Not just in miracles, but in the ordinary moments where your heart learns to lean. Think of a teacher during an exam. The teacher is always silent not because they've left the room, but because they've already given you everything you need to pass the test. That's how God's silence often works. You don't hear him because you're being invited to trust what he already said. You're being called to remember the promises made before the storm began. In 1 Kings 19, the prophet Elijah ran into the wilderness, exhausted and broken. He had done everything God asked, and still felt like a failure. He cried, "I've had enough. Lord, take my life." He lay under a tree, ready to give up. But God didn't rebuke him. He sent an angel with food and water. Then he led Elijah to a mountain. There was a mighty wind, but God wasn't in the wind. Then an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. Then a fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And finally, a still, small voice. That's where Elijah found him, not in the spectacle, but in the silence. Maybe that's what God is doing in your life right now. He's weaning your heart off the need for constant confirmation. He's teaching you to recognize his presence even when you don't feel it. Because faith isn't a feeling, it's a decision to trust. And yet, let's be honest, silence still hurts. It's confusing, it's heavy, it's lonely. There are nights when you stare at the ceiling and whisper, "Where are you?" But even then, something sacred is happening beneath the surface. The roots of a tree grow deepest in silence. You don't hear them pushing through the soil, but they're digging deeper, anchoring stronger, preparing to survive storms that haven't even arrived yet. That's what God's silence does to your soul. It roots you. It deepens you. It teaches you to rely on his presence, not just his voice. Sometimes, God's silence is the sound of him working behind the scenes. He's aligning things you can't see. He's protecting you from doors you didn't know would harm you. He's orchestrating divine timing that feels like delay but is actually destiny. If he answered every prayer immediately, you'd never learn endurance. You'd never learn trust. You'd never discover the quiet strength that comes from faith refined by fire. So if God feels silent right now, don't assume he's distant. Silence doesn't mean he's not speaking, it means he's speaking differently. Through people, through creation, through the very ache in your heart that keeps reaching for him. Sometimes his silence says, "Stay still." Sometimes it says, "Keep going." Sometimes it says nothing at all. And yet that nothing is filled with love. One day, you'll look back and realize his silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. Because it was in that silence that you stopped chasing feelings and started seeking his face. It was in that silence that your prayers became less about getting answers and more about knowing him. It was in that silence that your roots grew deep enough to carry fruit that would last. And when the voice returns, and it won't sound distant anymore. It will sound familiar, intimate, alive. You'll recognize it instantly. Because it's the same voice that carried you through the quiet. So if you're in that silent season right now, don't rush it. Don't resent it. Sit in it. Breathe in it. Let it do its holy work. God hasn't gone quiet to punish you. He's quiet because He's close. He's whispering to your soul, I'm still here. Even when you can't hear me, I'm holding you. And maybe that's the real miracle, not when the silence breaks, but when peace fills it. Because peace doesn't come when the noise returns. Peace comes when you realize He never left. There are moments in life when the weight of shame feels unbearable. When the mirror becomes a place you avoid, because it reflects not your face but your failures. You look at yourself and whisper, if people really knew me, they wouldn't love me. And maybe that's how you feel right now, unworthy, unlovable, too broken, too far gone. You've made mistakes you can't undo. You've hurt people you can't apologize to anymore. You've fallen so many times that you've stopped trying to get up. You sit in the quiet and think, God can forgive others, sure, but not me. And deep down, that lie starts to sound like truth. But let me tell you something that might change everything. God's love is not based on your worthiness. It's based on His nature. You don't earn it. You receive it. You don't deserve it. He gives it freely. Before you ever took your first breath, before you ever did anything right or wrong, He already chose to love you. And He hasn't changed His mind. We live in a world that loves conditionally. Be successful, and you'll be admired. Be attractive, and you'll be wanted. Be useful, and you'll be kept around. But fail, break, disappoint, and watch how quickly love disappears. That's human love. But divine love, it's different. God's love doesn't flinch at your scars. It doesn't retreat from your darkness. It walks straight into it and says, you are still mine. When Jesus met people, He didn't seek the perfect. He sought the broken. He didn't spend His time with kings or scholars. He sat with outcasts, touched lepers, defended adulterers, and spoke to those who thought they were beyond redemption. Think about the woman caught in adultery, dragged into the street, surrounded by men holding stones. They saw sin. Jesus saw a soul. They saw failure. Jesus saw a daughter. He knelt beside her and said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. He didn't pretend her past didn't exist. He just refused to let it define her future. Or think about the thief on the cross, a man whose life was marked by violence and regret. He had nothing left to offer, no good deeds, no second chances. And yet, with his final breath, he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied, today you will be with me in paradise. No conditions, no delay, just grace freely given to a dying man who could give nothing in return. That's love. That's what it looks like. Not earned, not deserved, but offered to the unworthy, the broken, the ones who think they've gone too far. So, if you feel unworthy, you're exactly the kind of person Jesus came for. He didn't die for the perfect. He died for those who thought they were beyond saving. When He stretched out His hands on the cross, He wasn't saying, this much for the righteous. He was saying, this much for you. For your failures, your guilt, your hidden pain. You may say, but I've disappointed God. My friend, you can't disappoint someone who already knew every part of you before you began. He knew your worst day and still chose the cross. You may say, I'm not enough. He says, I am. You may say, I've fallen too many times. He says, my mercy is new every morning. You may say, I don't deserve love. He says, you are loved anyway. That's grace, unexplainable, and reasonable, and stoppable grace. And here's something powerful: when you finally stop running from love, you realize it's been following you the whole time. Through every wrong turn, every dark valley, every night you thought you were alone, love was there. Waiting. Maybe you've spent years trying to fix yourself before coming back to God, but He's not waiting for the fixed version of you. He wants you right now. The messy, the hurting, the uncertain, the doubting. Because His love doesn't heal from a distance, it heals through embrace. Remember the story of the prodigal son. He ran far from home, squandered everything, and came back dirty, broken, and full of shame. He rehearsed his apology the whole way home, but before he could even finish it, his father ran to him, threw his arms around him, and called for a celebration. That's the Father's heart. He doesn't wait on the porch with crossed arms, He runs to meet you. And maybe right now, that's exactly what He's doing. Running toward you with open arms, whispering, "You're still mine. Come home." So how do you start believing you're worthy of love again? You start by seeing yourself the way God sees you. Not as a failure but as forgiven. Not as unworthy but as chosen. Not as broken but as being rebuilt. You start by replacing every lie with truth. You are not your mistakes. You are not your shame. You are not the opinion of those who left you. You are a child of God. You see, love doesn't find you when you finally have it all together. Love finds you in the ruins and begins rebuilding. God doesn't love some future version of you. He loves you right here, right now. So stop disqualifying yourself from grace. Stop believing that your past has the power to define your worth. You are not beyond the reach of mercy. In fact, mercy specializes in reaching where you think it can't. The moment you begin to see yourself through the lens of grace, you realize you've never been in love, just unaware. And one day, when you look back, you'll see that even in your darkest moments, God's love never let go. You'll realize that every wound became a window through which His light could shine. And you'll finally understand what He's been saying all along: you were never unworthy. You were always mine. So today, if you're tired of running, stop. If you're tired of pretending, exhale. If you're tired of carrying shame, lay it down. You don't need to earn His love, you just need to receive it. And once you do, you'll find peace not in who you are, but in whose you are. You are loved. You always have been. And nothing, no sin, no failure, no darkness can separate you from the love of God. There are days when you wake up and wonder why you should try again. You've prayed, you've waited, you've done everything you know how to do, and still, the mountain in front of you hasn't moved. Hope feels heavy. Faith feels like work. And deep inside, a quiet voice whispers, maybe it's time to quit. We all reach that place sooner or later, that edge where exhaustion meets despair, where dreams fade into disappointment, and even prayer feels like shouting into the wind. But listen carefully, that moment, the one that feels like the end, is often the exact place where God begins again. When you feel like giving up, it doesn't mean you're weak, it means you've been fighting for too long without rest. It means your soul is crying out not for escape, but for renewal. You see, even Jesus grew weary. In the Garden of Gethsemane, His soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He fell to the ground and prayed, "Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me." Even the Son of God had a moment when he felt the full weight of being human. But notice what He did next. He didn't quit. He prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." That sentence changed everything. Because surrender isn't giving up, it's giving over. It's releasing control, not releasing hope. Sometimes, God allows the pressure to rise so that we finally stop trying to be our own savior. He brings us to the end of ourselves so that we can discover His strength was there all along. Remember Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from heaven. One day he collapsed under a tree and said, "Lord, I've had enough. Take my life." He wasn't faithless, he was simply tired. So God didn't scold him. He sent an angel with fresh bread and water and said, "Get up and eat." Sometimes, what you need isn't a sermon, it's rest. Because even warriors need recovery before they can fight again. If you're standing on that edge today, feeling done, hear this: you are not finished. You are simply between chapters. The Bible is filled with people who almost gave up. Moses said, "I can't carry this people anymore." Job cursed the day he was born. Jonah ran away. David wrote, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" And yet, in every case, God turned breaking points into turning points. Maybe that's what He's doing for you. You see only the ashes, He sees the altar. You see failure, He sees formation. You see an ending, He sees a beginning. When you feel like giving up, remember, faith isn't measured by how you feel. It's measured by where you run when you're hurting. Run to Him, even if your prayer is nothing more than tears. He understands the language of the brokenhearted. There's a verse in Isaiah that says, "He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak." Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. Notice it doesn't say those who never struggle. It says those who hope. Hope isn't pretending everything's fine. Hope is trusting that, in time, everything will be redeemed. Maybe the thing you've been praying for hasn't happened yet because God is building something inside you first. He's not denying your prayer, He's developing your heart. He's making sure that when the blessing comes, you'll be strong enough to carry it. There's beauty in endurance. When a seed is planted, it disappears beneath the soil. It looks dead, but something unseen is happening. Its roots are growing deeper, preparing it to rise stronger than before. That's what God is doing in your waiting. Your buried season isn't your burial, it's your planting. So when the voice in your head says, "Quit," answer with faith. No, this is just the middle. God's story never ends in defeat. Resurrection always comes after the cross. And yes, there will be nights when your pillow is soaked with tears, when your mind tells you it's pointless, when your strength feels gone. But those nights do not define you, they refine you. Because when everything else fades, grace remains. Let this truth settle deep in your spirit. You are not alone in the fight. God has surrounded you with people, with angels, with His own Spirit. Even when you can't feel Him, He's there steadying your trembling hands, whispering, "Keep going." If you need to pause, pause. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to rest, rest. But don't quit. The promise is still alive. The purpose is still unfolding. The author hasn't finished writing your story. And one day, you'll look back at this valley and realize that what almost broke you actually built you. You'll see that every unanswered prayer, every lonely night, every why God was weaving together a faith that couldn't be shaken. So breathe. Lift your eyes. There is still light ahead. Because the same God who met Elijah under that tree, the same God who strengthened Jesus in Gethsemane, the same God who rolled away the stone is the same God who will lift you up. You may feel like giving up, but God is not giving up on you. So stand firm. Hold on. One more prayer. One more breath. One more step. The story isn't over and the best chapters are still to come. There comes a moment, often quietly, without any fanfare, when the chaos inside you begins to still. The storm hasn't completely passed, but something inside shifts. You stop fighting every wave, and for the first time in a long time, you float. That moment of that deep, sacred stillness is peace. Not the kind of peace that depends on perfect circumstances. Not the kind that requires everything to be fixed, but the kind that exists in spite of it all. The kind that lives in the middle of the mess and still whispers, "It is well with my soul." You see, peace doesn't arrive with the absence of trouble. It comes with the presence of God. It's not a place you reach, it's a person you rest in. For so long, you might have believed peace was on the other side of resolution. When the sickness healed, when the bills were paid, when the relationship was restored. But the truth is, peace has been beside you the whole time, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice. Peace begins when you stop needing answers and start trusting the one who holds them. There's a story in the Gospels that captures this perfectly. Jesus and his disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee. A furious storm rose, waves crashing over the boat. The disciples panicked. They shouted, "Lord, don't you care that we're perishing?" And there, in the chaos, Jesus was asleep. He wasn't careless. He was at peace. Because he knew the waves were under his command. When he stood and said, "Peace, be still," it wasn't just the wind that obeyed, it was their hearts. That's the kind of peace God offers you. Not a peace that ignores the storm, but one that stands in the middle of it and says, "Be still." For a long time, you might have thought peace was something you had to chase. But peace isn't found by running after it, it's found by surrendering to it. True peace is born in surrender. When you finally stop trying to control everything, every outcome, every person, every fear, you make space for God to move. You realize that His plan doesn't always match yours. But it's always better. That the things you lost weren't punishments, they were pruning. That the silence wasn't abandonment, it was invitation. That the waiting wasn't wasted, it was preparation. Peace is what happens when you finally understand that you don't need to understand. When you stop demanding explanations and start embracing presence. You might still cry. You might still ache. But even through the tears, you'll feel something holy, the stillness that doesn't make sense, a calm that doesn't depend on logic. The Bible calls it the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's not meant to be figured out, it's meant to be felt. And when it comes, you'll know. You'll notice it in small ways first. In the way you breathe slower. In the way your shoulders relax for the first time in months. In the way a sunset suddenly looks like a promise again, not an ending. You'll find yourself smiling at nothing in particular, just grateful to be here, still standing. Because peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of purpose. And maybe, just maybe, the reason for everything you went through was so that you could reach this place, where peace isn't just a theory, but your reality. The wounds that once screamed are now scars that whisper strength. The memories that used to hurt now remind you of how far you've come. The questions that haunted you now rest quietly beside your faith. You begin to see that God never left. That every valley you walked through was guided. That every prayer you thought went unanswered was answered in ways you couldn't yet see. And here's something beautiful: when you finally find peace, you stop trying to prove anything. You stop needing validation. You stop apologizing for healing slowly. You stop chasing people who left. Because peace brings contentment. You no longer strive to be understood, you just rest in being known by God. You start seeing life differently. The same world that once felt harsh now feels sacred. Every breath becomes a gift. Every sunrise, a reminder that mercy still renews. Every ordinary moment becomes holy ground. That's the miracle of peace that transforms perception. You realize that happiness and peace aren't the same. Happiness depends on what happens. Peace depends on who holds you through it. And in that peace, love returns. You begin to love people again, not because they're perfect, but because grace has softened your heart. You begin to forgive not because they deserve it, but because you no longer want to carry the weight. You begin to dream again, not recklessly, but bravely, because fear has lost its power over you. Peace gives you permission to live again. And maybe that's what God wanted all along, not a perfect life, but a peaceful one. Not a faith without storms, but a faith that can sleep through them. You've cried your tears. You've wrestled your doubts. You've walked through the fire. And now, as the smoke clears, you see something shimmering at the horizon: light. Not just the light of a new day, but the light of a new heart. Stronger, softer, free. The peace you were searching for was never lost. It was growing inside you the whole time. It just needed the silence, the waiting, the breaking to take root. So breathe. You made it. You've arrived, not at perfection, but at peace. And from this place, you can finally say with quiet confidence, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Not because everything makes sense, but because you've learned to trust the one who does. Peace isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. One written not by fear, but by faith. Not by striving, but by surrender. Not by control, but by love. And this time, you'll walk differently. Not anxious, but assured. Not hurried, but whole. Because now you know peace isn't something you wait for. It's someone who walks beside you. And he was there all along.